What's up, everyone? We are back for another episode of the Pair Program. I am your host, Tim Winkler, accompanied by my co-host, Mike Gruen. Mike, got a question for you.
All right.
Do you own Crocs?
I do not. I am anti-Croc.
Not a Croc guy, huh?
Not a Croc guy.
Like hate them.
I wouldn't say I hate them. I'm gonna probably buy some for my kids and stuff. But no, I'm not a Croc guy. Are you a Croc guy?
Yeah, not really. But
don't let my judgment impact your
the
answer.
The reason I bring it up, and I think it's interesting that you brought up that you're getting your kids some, is that we've had some debates here at Hatch about this, and there seems to be like a clear divide on Crocs. Like I was reading an article this morning about this where they took the top 10 most liked brands by like Gen Z, and then the top 10 most liked brands by millennials. And then as part of that study, what they did is they compared the widest favorability differences between the Gen Z and the millennials. And what do you think was in the top 3?
Clearly Crocs.
Crocs, Discord, and TikTok actually were the top 3. But I just think it's interesting because, Crocs have been around for years, but now, younger folks are coming in and loving them. And I think they pointed to like a big marketing spiel. Like, they get like musicians or KFC to come out and do these like special releases of the shoes. So
it's interesting because I'm Gen X. I want to make it very clear I'm not a millennial.
Clear, he's very old. Folks.
I am very old, and I am Gen X. But it's funny because I associate Crocs with my dad. So how about that?
Yeah.
My dad wears a lot of Crocs. Yeah.
I'm now I'm always seeing these new ones called natives that are like the new Crocs competitor. Because my 2-year-old and all of her friends all have natives. They're sort of similar. They're like rubber and like sort of like open air kind of.
Right.
They look a little bit more like
Crocs. Oh, sorry.
They look a little bit more like a normal shoe.
Yeah.
A little, as much as a rubber shoe full of holes can, I think.
Brian, what about you, man? Are you a Crocs guy?
No, I own a pair of Crocs, but they're just Crocs branded flip flops. They're very comfortable, but yeah. So I think they're extending their product line beyond just rubber holes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's widely debated topic. So I'm glad we
covered this one in depth.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let's give the listeners a little bit of a heads up on today's episode. So today we are going to be covering a topic centered around startup acquisitions, and specifically, when a company is acquired, what are the ripple effects that maybe take place on the employees and the team members from all the way at the executive level, leadership level, all the way down to entry level, junior level, everything in between. So. Per usual, we have 2 excellent guests here joining us, both of which are well versed on the topic. Both have experienced acquisitions in different capacities, so I'm confident that they'll bring some insight to our discussion. And Troy and Brian, thanks for spending time with us on the Pair Program.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. Yeah, glad to be here.
Excellent. All right. So, before we get into the meat of the discussion, we like to kick things off with a fun segment that we call Pair Me Up. Pair Me Up. Here's where we kind of go around the room. We shout out a complimentary pairing. Mike, you tee us off. What do you got today?
So now I have Crocs on my head, but I'll still resist
Crocs.
that urge. So last time we recorded, we were talking about company culture. So that got me thinking about essentially toxic companies and regret, and sort of sticking around for longer. I pride myself on like perseverance and grit, and like we can make this better, and sort of not recognizing when it's time to just sort of move on. So there's my pairing, really uplifting.
Would you like to call any companies out?
No, I think they know who they are.
That's great. Yeah, I think that could play well into maybe some of today's topic. Who knows? But I'll jump in. So my pairing today is stoicism and entrepreneurship. And I think for those that aren't familiar with Stoic philosophy, it's teachings from like ancient Greek philosophers like Marcus Aurelius. And these are teachings that are kind of designed to make you more resilient or a happier person.
Put up longer with toxic culture.
Yeah, that's right. Embrace toxic culture and Crocs. And but so one of the one of my morning routines, anyways, is I read this book. They have all these daily passages called the Daily Stoic. Great author, his name's Ryan Holiday, and he, a lot of folks consider him as like a modern Stoic, but it provides this daily passage, and then you kind of pull from it, some exercises for the day. And I think the reason that I relate this to entrepreneurship is that, a lot of the principles of Stoicism, or like the behaviors that I believe entrepreneurs need for the most part to kind of like sustain and continue down this journey of ups and downs, and eventually get to the other side of as successful. And like one of the examples I'll pull out is that they tap into this thing, focus on more about what you can control, stop worrying about what you can't control. And so obviously at Hatch, anyways, our business being in the recruiting space is just, there's so many, macroeconomics that are out of our control that play into whether or not we might have an excellent year or a terrible year. And I think the last couple of years actually have been a really, obvious reflection of this. And so I'd say, like, as a leader, I've tried to channel a lot of that stress and frustration and worry, and instead of focusing on what we can we can't control, focus on what we can control as a company, and have that kind of be my theme and my messaging and ways to my team. So anyways, that's my long-winded answer. Entrepreneurship and Stoicism.
On that note about, I can't help myself, on the note of not worrying about the things that you can't control or stressing about the things you can't control. I think one of the things that people don't realize that they can control are their reactions to those things. Mm-hmm. And so focusing really on how you react to the things beyond your control is within your control. So focus more on that.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Let's pass it around to our guest. Brian, why don't you give us a quick intro and tell us your pairing?
Yeah. So I'm Brian Retford. I'm the CEO at RISC It's a zero knowledge cryptography blockchain related startup. My last company was acquired by Intel about 4 years ago, and that was Vertex.AI, which is into AI compilation technology. My pairing, kind of related to Tim's, I guess, two things that go together, like a couple hours in a sauna and a massage. I think it's as a business leader, it's important to find time to let go of those things that you can't control, and sort of your frustrations with them and your frustrations with the things you can control. So always try to get in a lot of time for calming down.
Yeah, I love that. Nice. I think that needs to be a standard benefit at this point.
Yeah, pretty much.
It is true though. Like massages, like everybody, look, they're certainly expensive, but if you relate it to like a health benefit, what is that worth to you if you did one a month? I'm trying to be better at that, but it's the type of thing where it's like getting over the mental block of like, oh, that's like a gift. Like you don't just go and do like a monthly massage. Or long and short is, I think we need to be doing daily, weekly massages at this point. Cool. All right, Troy, intro and a pairing.
Yeah, I'm Troy Crosby. I'm momentarily joining PatientIQ as their director of engineering. They're helping big players in the healthcare space orient their practices and decision making around patient health outcomes. In the past, I was an engineering leader at a small CRM for real estate startup called Contactually, acquired by Compass, big real estate brokerage. And I'll go really lighthearted for my pairing. I would have said chips and salsa, which is just a weakness snack of mine, except for I've just gone past the salsa and just gone straight to eating chips with hot sauce straight. And that's just it's probably terrible, right? But I just have chips and hot sauce cravings multiple nights a week at 9 p.m. Probably great for heartburn and sleeping, but I can't help myself.
There's another pairing, heartburn and sleeping.
Yeah. I got 2 for 1 there.
All right. I thought we'd actually make it a whole one full round without any food. I'm glad we didn't. That was good. We always have to have at least some food in there. That's good.
Is there a hot sauce that you crave on a chip, or is it do you mixing it up each time?
Everything that Yellowbird makes is a really good brand. They don't have crazy things, relatively basic, but they're just really good basic hot sauces.
Yeah.
They have a really good habanero, and they have their own version of a sriracha that's just better than sriracha.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm a big Cholula fan. So
it's a good one. Good one.
Yeah, good on a chip, Tostito chips. All right, well, cool. I think that kind of wraps that up. Let's dive into the heart of the discussion here. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about post acquisition expectations, and we did strategically choose our guest here, given their specific experience in acquisitions and also like their unique perspectives on the topic. So, for example, Brian, you sat in the executive seat as a CTO and co-founder, for a small startup, was acquired by a large tech company. And then Troy, you served in the seat as an engineering manager. So really kind of seeing it from that middle management layer of a startup that was acquired. And so I think we have a great opportunity here to really peel the onion back on the scenario and dissect how it impacts folks across the board. So Brian, let's actually start with you on this. And can you shed some light as a founder, C-suite in a startup that is soon to be acquired? How do you begin to approach this topic with, maybe your peers, the management layer and others within the company? And then we can jump to you, Troy, afterwards and cover it.
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends on where you're at. Where we were at was running out of money. So I think everybody sort of knew that was the case. And we ended up, we tried to raise money for a bit, realized we probably just need to exit the market, and started looking for a buyer, but actually realized that was probably not going to be super effective. We had gotten sort of an early offer from Intel, but then they went quiet. And so we ended up hiring a consultant to help us. So there was a lot of discussion about whether we, wanted to ditch their very high fee in the event that we did get acquired. But I think it was the right call. So yeah, in our case, it was a bit of desperation. It's not a situation you want to end up in, I don't think. But it had a reasonably happy ending. So yeah.
What was how big was Vertex at this time?
It's only 10 people. So it was a pretty small company. Yeah.
Okay. And how long were you guys operating before it went to an acquisition?
About 2 years.
Okay. Yeah. And so, and we'll dissect that a little bit more. But Troy, your most recent experience, was working for a startup based in the DC area. So a little shout out there, a little DC startup love to contextually that was acquired by Compass. Can you provide context on what your role was at Contextually leading up to the acquisition and the size of the team and think how that played out?
Yeah, I mean, Contextually was a little bit bigger. It was like maybe 50, 60 people. And I don't know if they say running out of money, but like it was transitioning to sort of thinking about raising a new round of funding or kind of had been courting an acquisition. But like, the question of like, how do you broach this conversation with the team? That definitely played out a lot for us because it's like, I think acquisitions are always like some degree of bittersweet, right? Like teams usually like, where they're working and like the people they work with. And so it's like the acquisition is a big like wrench thrown in the equation. It's like, oh, what do we know about this company? Am I going to like working there as much? Like, what's their culture like? What's their like, am I going to be working on something totally different? Like, do I want to work on that? So it's really easy to like for people to get sucked into that. But I remember like a big thing that I was trying to drive home for folks was like, if you work at a startup, like, we're not just there to like code or design, but like kind of our goal is like create business value, like from thin air, right? It's like, that's why you work at a startup. Like, wow, you're creating something new. If you get acquired, like you succeeded, right? It's like to some degree, that's like a mark of success, badge of honor. And so it's like spend some time, like kind of celebrating the win before you start like, trying to think through all the new ramifications of the new place. Like, that's something to be really proud of. Certainly, there is like new territory then that has to get explored, but like you want to spend time with a team, like being positive about, like what you've all achieved too.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm curious on if there were differences here between the Vertex and Contextually story with regards to, did you retain your brand and some of those items that are special to you as a company, or was it a strategy of like quickly dissolve everything? You're now the new company, and Vertex, for example, right? Did you have a chance to kind of did they care to keep Vertex as like a product brand or anything within Intel, or what was the strategy there?
Yeah, so we had an open source project that I think was mostly what Vertex was known for, which is still somewhat alive, FlatML. And so Intel did leave that alive, although they didn't really continue to invest in it, at least initially. We ended up later going back and sort of building a new version of it. But the Vertex.AI brand, actually, they just totally let the domain expire, which is funny because Google now has a product called Vertex.AI. So
classic.
It was a good name.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Troy? How long did Contactually?
Kind of similar. Like we kept that old product offering around, but it was like an independent product line, and it wasn't what our team then worked on. Like our team then worked on Compass stuff, and the old product was sort of independent and left to linger for a while. It's gone now, but it took 2.5, 3 years before they eventually wound that down. And so like, yeah, the brand existed, but we stopped like recruiting under that brand name. We stopped, Tim, you mentioned like being in DC. We stopped sort of like advertising like a presence in DC under that brand name. It's like you want to sort of turn a corner and adopt, the think of yourself as employees of your new company, not your old one. But it did. That might be an interesting segue. Like that raised some challenging things in the recruiting space. It was like we joined Compass, and then pretty immediately we're told like, hey, like, go grow your team by like 35% in the next 6 months. Like just go start hiring. And there's this like, we had some recognition in DC with our old company. And so we could sort of pull on that brand recognition a little bit, but like we're recruiting for a new company. But there's like people knew some of us, and we would, have pitches like, hey, like we're the Contactually team now at Compass, and people sort of knew like, oh, like that group has a good culture. They knew us. But we had definitely had a few misfires. It was like people go through the interview process and they're like, who am I interviewing for? Am I interviewing for this old company or this new company? Like we kind of had to like adjust a little and realize like more heavily change our branding and our messaging. And I think like probably both companies had like strengths that we could pull on in the recruiting space. But we just sort of realized that, and it took a few months, I think. Like,
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We sort of had at Intel, in theory, we were supposed to grow our team by like 20 people, but very shortly after we got acquired, they did an external hiring freeze, and our headcount got slashed quite a bit. But we still ended up probably doubling the size of our team, but we could only recruit internally. So we were actually in a pretty good space because Intel is such a huge company, and we did have like sort of the exciting AI startup that got acquired into Intel Cache. So we're actually able to get quite a lot of very high quality internal talent.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you think about, everybody joined a startup for certain reasons, and the reality is that a lot of those reasons are going to change. And so, it's almost like, because I think there's two things to look at here. There's one that's recruiting, but then there's talent retention. So it's like, okay, well, you join Contactually, you've been there for a year, and, they get acquired, and your goal was to work with a company that was under 100 in headcount for the next 3 years or what have you. Well, now that's changed, and now you're working with a large company, and where did you value that in terms of, what you were looking for in your, short to long-term goals versus what just got thrown on you? Then, if you had to prioritize that, then, that probably plays into, well, am I going to stick around or am I going to move on? Yeah,
you definitely have some people who like, based on what they were there for, like could sort of think relatively soon, like, this might not be for me. I think a lot of times it's like the purchasing company, incentivizes people through equities to stick around for some vesting cliff or something like that, which, happened for us. So we had really good, retained our team for quite a while. Eventually that started to change, but I think like something that's kind of really unique though is like usually you join a new company as an individual and you're like really lost, right? You're like, you have so much to figure out. Like it is really unique to join a company as a team. Like, totally. Oh, wow, I get to join a company with a whole bunch of people I already know. Right. We're bringing some like obviously desirable knowledge to the table that you were acquired for. Like that is kind of interesting. Like you get to ramp up together, compare notes together. So, it's like, that's something that you almost don't think about, but if like gets called out, it's like, oh, wow, yeah, this is an opportunity worth me like really going for. There's maybe a downside to that too, right? Like you join with the whole group, like you might like gossip a little bit. You could very easily like critique your purchasing company.
Yeah.
Because like you have this whole crew.
That happens.
So you have to be careful there with like some tribalism can definitely like sneak in.
But yeah, I think that was like a positive aspect of the acquisition is, our team wasn't like immediately dissolved into some other team. We did get reorged a bunch of times and tossed around, but Intel was, struggling to figure out its AI strategy in its entirety. But, we had we were basically the only engineering team in Seattle. So we kind of just moved into much nicer offices and still had roughly the same team and got to keep kind of growing it, although we weren't really in control of our own destiny at all anymore.
We were similar. Like we were the only engineering team in DC, and then we'd like host other teams coming down from New York to like visit us in our space, and that was kind of like a cool social kind of aspect.
Yeah. What's the messaging like? Because I'll be honest, if I'm taking this from the recruiting perspective here, whenever a company gets acquired, they go into a channel in our Slack that puts them on high visibility that says there's a good chance that there's going to be folks here that aren't going to be happy in the next couple of months. And that's just the reality. Some people love it. And some people, like, again, it goes back to the point, like, that's not what I signed up for. And here we are. But what's the messaging like, for you, Troy, like with the team in terms of, how do I know that my role is secure? Like, how transparent are they with you? Like, tell me about that messaging. Because I think that plays a part into like, am I probing now or am I not?
Well, it kind of goes back to Mike saying like these different types of acquisitions. And like in our case, they kind of wanted a bunch of our technology, and we had like proven to be like a pretty lean customer centric startup in the real estate space. And they were really wanting more customer centricity. And they're like, oh, these are experts in this. And so like we were really highly desired. So I didn't think there was much concern about retention. I think messaging was a little bit vague, to be honest. I think like in our case, we joined and exactly what we should be starting to work on right away on day one was pretty unclear. I think it took a number of months to really like get our feet under us. But during that time, like we just like really leaned into our social bonds a lot, right? So like, hey, look, we're all together. Let's hang out. Let's do a few more happy hours. Let's try and bridge the gaps with other groups. Like celebrate the wins we can as a group, even if like our normal workflow is like a little bit disrupted right now. Like definitely were some like lighter work weeks for sure for a month or two.
Interesting. We, in our case, it was like sort of acqui-hires, sort of technological acquisition. They wanted us to basically take our technology and our experience in the team and apply it to a sort of new domain, which is hardware, software, co-design. So basically building compilers for chips that didn't exist yet to help explore the sort of space of chips you might build. So it's actually pretty exciting from a technological perspective and from a like challenge. So the team, pretty much embraced it and was excited about the opportunity to do this. However, the chip we were working on got canceled a couple months after we started. Immediately, like no, you can't take a break. You need to like this product's already behind, so it's like sell the company, and we were like in the trenches. And then of course it didn't matter. So that was a bit disheartening. But for a bit there, it did seem like we had a solid charter, and the team did really embrace it. So we actually didn't lose anyone except for our CEO. But
what was the pivot at that point when like what you were working on got like a huge wrench thrown in it? Like what came next? Especially like how did the team adapt to that? Like,
well, they canceled that chip in favor of the next version of that chip. It was honestly it went back and forth like all over the place.
So it was like a pretty logical transition. Like,
yeah, and then we started working more on what we honestly like. They're like, well, we actually do need some compiler technology, so we actually kind of pivoted back to what we were working on in the first place. And like, see, you should have just embraced this in the first place, but didn't happen. So
yeah, we found that like. I mean, speaking of like, we had some light work weeks when it first happened, like, we were in like a rhythm where like product and design and engineering, would always work really, really tightly. And then when we suddenly weren't sure exactly what to work on next, I think somewhere where we misstepped, and like if I could do it again, it'd be different, is I'd like immediately decouple product and engineering and design and say, hey, look, like we don't know exactly what we're doing for the next month. Each of these disciplines, like go to what makes sense for your discipline for like ramping up and backlog, and it might be different.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe engineering works on debt for a month, maybe design goes and like figures XYZ out for a month. Like we should all kind of like the best optimal move for each of those groups may be different.
Totally.
Even though like normally it's very tightly coupled.
Yeah, I think we only had two groups, engineering and business, and there was only one person in the business group, and that was the CEO, and he moved on.
It's like the product and business people, I think, like had to really adapt their like, like normally you have like filters for like understanding the right signal through all the noise. Like what's the most important thing? Like what's the sort of lay of the land? And like that equation in their head was like totally reset. It was like they had to figure out like, well, what is the most valuable thing for us to be working on next? And it's like took them a while to like sort of reassess the landscape again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I ended up eventually managing a like 50-person team at Intel, but that was also quite tumultuous. And I don't know that it was exactly what, I signed up to do. But that's a good point. And I think it's important if you end up in a big company we initially tried to sort of stay out of politics and the fray. And I think you do that at your own peril. Like if you're going to be somewhere for 3 years, you should just embrace it, get in there and really try to make your mark.
Yeah, definitely had some of that too. It was like, I definitely ended up having a lot of opportunity. There was a VP of engineering who was above me at my previous job. And as soon as we joined, he saw another opportunity in Compass and said, oh, I'm going to go lead that. So he grew into an area and then left another, like a vacuum for me to grow into as well. But I feel like in any acquisitions, like there's kind of that promise of like, hey, there's going to be tons of growth opportunity for everyone. Question is like, is it a reality or not? Like it's a really easy thing.
Totally.
It's a really easy talking point to say. And then it was almost like the people who are acquired, like there may be some degree of savviness in terms of like how well do you read the landscape to say, hey, well, there's an area for growth. There's an area for growth. Like how do I position myself for them? Which, like some people like may pull that off. Some people may have some like missteps. Like it feels a little bit like, a dice roll probably in some cases.
And I'm trying to put myself in the situation and so let's just say I'm a juniorish person versus, maybe somebody that at your level, Troy, went during the acquisition. I'm not going to feel like, I don't know. I would feel like I almost need to go and tap the folks that are in my current, startup to see, what they recommend. I might be at my exposure versus trying to find somebody in the new company and feeling like it's just, there's not that level of comfort of, well, I've been working with you, Troy, for a year. Can you work with me and help me navigate the waters of Compass of where I might be able to excel versus like trying to go find somebody new in Compass that you don't know, from Adam. And now the next thing you know is, maybe they don't give you the level of attention as they would somebody senior that came in through the acquisition. Yeah,
it goes back to that, like the unique scenario, like joining as a group, like
right.
A new person at any other company wouldn't have those same dynamics, but it is definitely like a unique scenario.
You brought up a point and I read so Troy, you pushed an article about this called 12 Engineering Leadership Lessons for Success After an Acquisition. And it's a great write-up. We'll actually post it in the show notes.
It might be a great write-up. I don't know how well it's aged. It's probably like a year or two ago.
Well, I found some little golden nuggets in there, and I think the point you make about the avoiding tribalism is interesting to me, which essentially kind of like getting away from this thinking in terms of like us and them. And so, you pointed out on here is like as a leader, it's your responsibility to kind of like nip that in the bud if you feel like it's coming on. Like you're out at a happy hour and, the topics come up about, this is the way it used to be. Now it's this way. Trying to steer those conversations away and thinking more about like, well, how we work together and in our new future. How is that? Because I always feel like that would be, because
I mean, it's right. Like even right? It's like I say like, oh, we should do that, but like I definitely did it, right? It's like probably impossible. Like Brian, right? I imagine, right? Like it was always present for probably quite a while still. So hopefully it's like subtle and lingering and not prominent.
But like in our case, go ahead.
I was just saying, hopefully it's like, like a subtle thing and like, but it's hard to totally get rid of, it could definitely exist without being negative. Like you could still have this concept like, oh yeah, our old team, like, we did this and there could be learnings from that, but like, it's so easy for it to devolve into like negative territory.
Yeah, I think Intel is such a tribal place, and we were acquired into an acquisition, which was reorged into another acquisition that was then supposedly the entire AI team. But then there were a bunch of other AI teams at Intel. So it was basically just like, which tribe am I on today? And who are we trying to like shiv in the back inside the company somewhere else? No, it's a pretty political environment in groups there. So I think it's great if you can do it, but sometimes you just have to, figure out who your new tribe is instead.
And it's,
Right.
Yeah, because you can't like do away with the concept of like groups, right? It's like human nature, like, oh, we're going to think of ourselves in groups, and like that's perfectly fine. But it's just so easy then for it to like always be like maybe nitpick another group, compare it to your group, and just the slippery slope.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the type of thing where you almost have to do a self-assessment and figure out what are the things that I prioritize in an opportunity and in a company. And I think what we've seen bigger picture becoming more and more important to folks. And I think, I don't know, just post COVID, but this has become more and more of a thing is values based recruiting and trying to align with a company that one maybe promotes their values and seeing how does that align with mine. But then two, like if you're assessing yourself and after this acquisition and the values were the reason that you joined this one company, this new acquiring company, care less about a value statement, but more like how do we drive profits and everything. That might then lead you down the path of, I already know what that came in high on my ranking. I'm probably going to start looking for something here because this isn't.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think at Intel, it's pretty easy to get excited about the Intel product portfolio. It's basically the nerdiest possible aspects of computer science. But the culture there, like especially the software engineering culture, really needed some help. And I guess, I took it upon myself to try to move the needle. I don't know if I recommend that in all instances, but
even if it's not like fundamental like traits of the like business and like their mission, but just even like cultural and process styles within the company. It's like at least several people that I remember being had been there and said like I really prefer like working this way, but Compass tends to work this way, and they were kind of debating like whether or not it felt right for them to be there. And it was like you had to engage in conversations like, okay, well, you are having really good growth in this area. So it's really going to come down to, like, where is your priority? Like I was saying, is this growth important enough such that you're okay dealing with that thing that's like usually not your preference? And you just have to make the choice. Like if it is, then you grow for a while and you despite it. And if it's not, you say like, okay, well, you go find a place that does align to that preference because maybe that preference is really important to you. And it's like kind of fine. I think there's almost a concern amongst groups that get acquired of like, am I kind of like letting people down if I leave or something like that? It's like, should be relatively open that like, look, like, this is weird. Like this is different. And like, we want to talk about it and people want to like think about other things. Like it's a very reasonable thing for people to do.
And I think as a leader, like moving into an acquisition, and I think that's a good sort of, you should have that orientation, be willing to sort of coach your team in that direction and not really try to hold on to, what happened in the past. I think it's important to really, coach people in that way and give people the space to move on if that's what's best for them. Because that's also going to be what's best for the team in the long run.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Intel did a great job, honestly. I think they, in terms of dealing with people, they're pretty good about that, generally speaking. And it was pretty obvious that, you're required now, you're part of the Intel family. And if you want to move on to any other part of Intel, or people stay there for 20 years, I guess, for reasons. But so I think Intel had yeah, that's
branded.
Having 100,000 person company, they get pretty good at this kind of like onboarding stuff. So actually we felt really kind of special, and they did a really good job of making us feel, like important that we were there. Yeah.
Ours is a little bit different. It was like Compass did really well of making people feel like they had some incentive and they were valued by like good equity and, good, to retain people. But I felt on some of the people level, it's not that it was bad. It just wasn't as that sort of wasn't as present. And I think more organically fell to middle managers to kind of bridge that gap.
Well, to what extent is it also kind of fall on the founders that sold, and how much did they care to sell for these reasons versus the money?
Yeah.
I think obviously that's a personal question, and in every circumstance is going to be different. But for example, you can almost relate it to selling a home, right? You lived in a home, grew your family here, and you want to be really selective about who your next buyer is because you don't want them to see the house go to shit. Well, what about like the founder that's like, we built this thing and everybody's so passionate about it, really being diligent, and like the acquiring company needs to make sure like this doesn't all just fall to the wayside, or how do I prioritize that, and working with whatever financial firms to say like these are my top important things from an acquisition. I don't know how much that goes into it or not, but that seems like it's kind of top of mind for me if I was wondering what my founding team was also looking for there beyond just the money.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might have tried to hold out a bit longer if we weren't pretty confident that the Intel didn't want to just reorg us into a million pieces and didn't have some kind of legitimate need for the stuff we were working on. So I think we took a lot of comfort in what they wanted us to do, and it's hard to say what we would have done differently if it hadn't been apparent that they sort of had a future in mind for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about like, so at RISC Zero now, the as you're growing and just maybe tapping on some of those experiences from Vertex of what you would do differently now in terms of almost like from a timeline perspective of trying to like set, I don't know how much transparency goes into the team of this is our goal in terms of getting to acquisition. Obviously that's a tough question to answer any entrepreneur or founder that's running a business, but are you planting those seeds earlier? Does it matter, or anything else that comes to mind of like pulling on that past experience that you bring into RISC Zero?
Yeah, definitely. Blockchain's a bit weird of a space because you can kind of like IPO by launching a token. So which is a lot easier to get to. It's kind of messy and weird that this exists, but we're kind of at a point where we're like, we don't want to get acquired, but if that happens, I guess that's fine. And we're going to structure our business in such a way that that's, a potential outcome, but we're trying to, make this a company that lasts. I think that's what we took away from the last startup acquisition experience is like, let's, we like doing this and we like, having, the ability to build our own house there, I guess. Mm-hmm. So we're really just trying to make sure we have appropriate runway and that we have, product market fit and, or, appropriate levels of investment to keep the thing going for, the foreseeable future until we can get to some self-sustaining point.
Nice. Cool. Troy, anything else you want to add to the topic before we transition to the next?
I mean, on that particular question, I think, I was recently I'm joining a new job soon, but one thing I was doing when talking to a couple of folks was, some companies would be like, hey, we're chasing an IPO, or that's our goal. As I now, having gone through this, wanted to also understand, like, would you sell? Under what scenarios would you sell? Like, sometimes people try to treat IPO as like option number one, and acquisition is like maybe the backup plan. But I kind of wanted like to understand, like, the reality is founders are going to be open to acquisitions, but I wanted, as an incoming like engineering leader, to be like, I want to understand the founder's brain, like what they're thinking about, and like what scenario would they sell? Because I want to go into like a new role with eyes wide open in that regard. I think
yeah, I mean, as a founder, you do have an obligation to do right by your investors. So if selling is what makes the ultimate sense, you kind of got to be open to it no matter what.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really smart though, Troy. I'd be kind of doing a little bit more probing too, and just see what you can uncover. I think there's a level of appreciation that you have that you have that level of concern or interest in terms of the future here. I think if it comes across as like, hey, take it easy with these questions, it might actually be a red flag.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want it to be intentional and not sort of stumbling into it backwards. That
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, I'm going to transition us now to this final segment called "Round Out My Career." So this is a session where we have this community wheel behind me. We spin it. It's got questions and topics that are usually crowdsourced from our community, the Hatchpad community, and they can range from compensation to diversity. I'm actually not going to spin it. I already have a question kind of teed up that I think is something that has been brewing over here. And in fact, it's an upcoming episode that we're going to be recording here in the next couple of weeks. And I think there's some interesting things to pull apart here. And I want to see, how maybe you interpret it, Troy, and also how you might interpret this, Brian. But so the upcoming episode is called The Co-Founder Connection. And what we're doing is tapping into kind of like how co-founders align, how they might complement one another. And, every startup has a different path. Some it's a solo founder. Some I've seen have like 4 co-founders. And so I'm always curious to know, what plays into maybe, do folks see the 4 and like, oh, wow, they're at a much greater advantage. But then you got a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? Does that lead to a little bit more of, arguments over, small decisions and things like that? But, I'll start, Brian, with you. Just, you've got a co-founder currently, and you got 2 co-founders, and at Vertex you had
the same 2. Well, actually different 2, but okay. Effectively, we've known each other for 20 years. But go ahead. Sorry.
So what would you say are some of the traits that you think are important to have with co-founders that either complement or don't? What have you seen like be successful or not so healthy?
Totally. So I would start off by saying I would never do this alone. Personally, I think that sounds insane to me. There's just so much to do, and I would say, me and Frank and Jeremy like complement each other really well. I think there's some skill sets that I kind of wish we even had in our sort of founding cohort that we didn't. And if I knew that person, I would always include them in startups. And that's more like, organizational skills and so forth. But I think it's really important to have a good dynamic there. And also I think it helps prevent, blind spots by having a more diverse perspective, especially earlier on. It stops you from making mistakes. But then, yes, you do have to deal with, who's going to be CEO this time and other contentious topics like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Pick out of a hat.
I am disappointed I didn't get to hear the clicking noise, but does that answer your question, or can I expound on that?
No, I think that's really helpful. And I actually appreciate the point of not doing it solo. I like an idiot started this business solo. But, come to find out, my first hire is, become my co-founder, my partner.
Totally.
But wish I had done it a lot earlier, because there's a lot of anxiety and stress that falls on one person. It's helpful to be able to talk that through with somebody else that's going through it with you. Troy, what about you? Like seeing it from, I think it's kind of interesting of looking at it from, also when as you're interviewing, almost like looking at like the founding team and seeing, who does what and what kind of those backgrounds might look like. But anything off the top of your head that comes to mind?
I mean, like I had an opportunity, like a head of engineering opportunity somewhere that I decided not to pursue because very early stage, like a seed stage. But I felt it was a solo founder, and I felt that for this particular scenario that the person probably needed some like more experienced counterparts to be around them. It was like too much for the one person. And I just felt like that maybe wasn't the best scenario to join. I guess it's kind of like, I mean, in other cases, right, I feel like one person can do it depending on who it is and the scenario, what background they bring. But like, I guess, like it matters. I think it's like worth assessing about a place, but it's like not the same equation everywhere, right? It's like, it's a valid factor, but it's like not a valid factor in the same way at each place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's very good. Yeah. I think it goes to the, like, make sure you're asking questions. If you're thinking about working for a startup, really ask good questions to the founders and figure out what exactly
whatever the founding team is, are they positioned well for that specific scenario, to succeed or not? Like whether it's one of them or four of them.
I'll say it's easier to raise money with a team. I think it's a lot easier when you're like, this is our third company we've made together, and the last one was acquired by Intel, and you put 3 people up there. You get a lot fewer questions.
Well, and you don't have one person spending all of their time doing fundraising. It's like, you have a third of you maybe spending your time doing fundraising.
Yeah. Some people can do engineering while you're fundraising. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've seen it too, where they look for somebody that will complement them. Well, obviously, I think personality plays a big piece. Like you need to make sure you guys get along, guys and girls get along. And one of the things that you can look into is maybe one of the founders is really strong in the industry, right? Maybe they're if it's a fintech platform, like they came up the ranks of financial companies, and they've got a really good grasp on the industry, but maybe that doesn't mean that they're the creative type. So, maybe there's someone that's got the ideas and the creativity, but then there's somebody that's, the operational execution, side of things. But a common theme that I've seen that, needs to be a part of it, if it's not, is somebody needs to be a good storyteller. Like somebody needs to be able to explain like why this is a unique, company, product, what have you. And that probably plays into investing and getting investors on board. But you can't just both be, the introvert that doesn't really know how to publicly interact and tell that story. And so those are some common things that I've seen.
I still have friends that are the introvert trying to make their startup succeed, and they've been doing it for like 8 years, and they're still just kind of in the same spot. So
just navigating some Discord chats and not really taking it too public. Cool. Well, yes, stick around in a couple months. We'll have a little bit more on the topic. But on this one, this has been fun, guys. I appreciate you all joining us and providing the insight. And I think that's a wrap.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
for sure.
Fun.